Welcome back to another episode of the Extra Literary Affairs podcast. Today, Jennifer and I will be having an affair with Edgar Allan Poe and his short story, The Telltale Heart, to wrap up our Summer of Madness 2025 edition. I think this is the third time that we've discussed Poe, but I think we've done 4. Have we done 4? It doesn't matter. Anyway, we've done
Black
him.
Cat.
Yeah.
We've talked about the Raven, and I want to say there was
Annabelle
something
Lee.
else. Annabelle Lee, yes.
So then this is the 4th rendezvous. So he is our most discussed author on this channel, apparently. Okay, so as popular as Edgar Allan Poe is, let me show my edition of the complete works. This is all of his poetry and all of his prose. There is a slight defect. The raven's wing is partially missing. That pissed me off, but that was the only edition that they had when I bought that.
Can you turn it so we can see how thick it is? Because I think there's a lot going on in there. Yeah.
And like these are full pages of text. Well, now that's poetry, but yeah, this is dense. Like, there's a lot of stuff that he wrote, obviously. He was very prolific. And some of his poetry I'm not as big a fan of. All right, anyway, it doesn't matter. The Telltale Heart is one of his more popular stories. I think probably a lot of people have read this probably in school. It's like The Pit and the Pendulum, The Mask of the Red Death, and stuff like that is usually what people read. But let me give us a little summary of this. So The Telltale Heart by Edgar Allan Poe is a chilling exploration of guilt and madness. Our narrator, a nameless figure, insists that they are perfectly sane, but their obsession with the old man's vulture eye, pale and clouded, drives them to commit a gruesome murder. At night, they sneak into the old man's room, watching silently. Finally, on the 8th night, consumed by the hatred of the eye, they strike, smothering the old man and hiding the body beneath the floorboards. But the murder isn't the end of the torment for the unnamed guy. When the police arrive, the narrator calmly welcomes them, convinced their crime is undetectable. Yet as they chat, a sound begins to echo, a heartbeat. Low at first, then louder. The narrator is gripped by panic. Is the old man's heart still beating? Or is their own guilt thundering in their ears? Unable to bear it any longer, they break down, shrieking their confession. Poe leaves us questioning, what was the sound? Was the sound real, or was it just the unraveling mind of a killer? What are your thoughts on Poe? He is a foundational American author, especially in Gothic horror. So, are you a fan? Do you like to read him?
Joey, I have really enjoyed exploring Poe with you and others, and I'm not sure that Edgar Allan Poe would be something I instinctively reach for. I'm like, hey, why don't I just read some classic literature? Why don't I start with Poe? But when I understood through other conversation, he is like the father of the short story genre. He was instrumental in figuring out the detective story, and he also has some fingerprints on early science fiction writing. I was like, this guy had it all. And I think what was so impressive for me about Poe is that we bring him up so often when we are talking about other stories, his influence, his ability to just nail the story. The first instant, you believe everything this man says. And I think that's what makes his work in general so chilling and so memorable. He's not necessarily using very fancy language. He's very straightforward, but his stories, at least the ones that have made their way down to us, 200 years later, they hit it right on the head. There's no doubt that he is a masterful storyteller. And so that was something that was really interesting for me. I have taken a virtual tour of Poe's house in Baltimore. There is a space here in Philadelphia that's also credited for one of his homes. And he packed a lot in the 40 years that he was alive. But he also, at every twist and turn, he was faced with loss, sadness, madness. It was just not a great life, I think, for his lived experience, but it turned out some really great literature. So that's what I know about Poe, Joey. That's what sticks out for me is like, oh, you poor guy. Like, you just can't catch a break.
But, I mean, we all benefited from that. So, sorry, Poe, but, at least you got that. Okay, so to give us a little background on Edgar Allan Poe, he was one of the most hauntingly influential figures in American literature. He was born in 1809 and died 40 years later from a mysterious illness. Poe's life was marked by tragedy and instability. His parents died young, and yet out of this darkness came a literary voice unlike any other. Part of the American Romantic movement, Poe was one of the first writers to make his living exclusively through his writing, working for literary journals and becoming known as a literary critic. Poe is credited with pioneering the short story genre and inventing detective fiction, which would later inspire Arthur Conan Doyle's Sherlock Holmes, which I'm not like a huge fan of. I think like, whatever. We don't talk about Sherlock Holmes. He is best known for his works of the macabre, including such infamous titles as The Raven, The Pit and the Pendulum, and The Fall of the House of Usher. Poe didn't just write horror, he invented psychological terror. He peeled back the human mind to reveal its obsessions, its madness, and its chilling beauty. His short stories explore fear not through monsters or gore, but through the collapse of reality itself. Poe's poetry, especially The Raven, brought musicality and melancholy to new heights. His rhythmic intensity and gothic imagery have etched themselves deep into the cultural imagination. In just 40 years of life, Poe reshaped literature. He gave voice to the dark corners of the psyche, evaluating horror into art and laying the groundwork for genres we still treasure today. His legacy whispers through every tale that dares to ask, what if the terror was already inside us? Okay, I've talked enough.
Joy, thank you for saying that, because the one thing that popped up to me as you were reading through some of his accolades is how many authors we've read who have publicly said Poe is an influence on my work. Just to think that his writing career was very short. He lived 40 years, but 200 years later, people are still retelling his tales and using some of his stylistic devices. So that always impresses me to see those things echoing back through time.
Yeah, good job, Poe. You really killed it, even though such a short life. So many authors like him, I almost said Edgar Allan Poe, obviously that's Edgar Allan Poe. Jane Austen, there's so many that they died, and Virginia Woolf, they died so young, and then you always wonder like, well, what did we miss out on from their body of work because they just didn't, they, for whatever reason, died very young. And could have been so many great pieces of literature or poetry in his case, that he could have written, and we'll never know.
No.
Tear. Okay. All right. So, what are your first impressions of The Telltale Heart?
Joey, I'm sure at some point in my life I had read The Telltale Heart previously, but there were a lot of things that I had forgotten. So I felt like I was coming into the story completely fresh. And from the opening paragraph, I'm like, okay, we have been exploring the Summer of Madness. So we have talked a lot about different forms of madness, societal expectations, all of that fun stuff. And I found this to be perhaps the most chilling of the stories that we read, because the character of the madman, who is not named, is so rational, so pulled together, so authoritative in letting you know that he is simply not mad. He's, in my words, evil. A person who can do a horrific crime and very calmly interact with you, tell you there was no rhyme, no reason. I did it because I wanted to. I did. That freaks me out to no end, Joey. Like, that's the scariest thing. I'm like, okay, I understand perhaps people losing control of themselves in an instant. Okay, crimes of passion, possibly. And this character was so clear in saying, it's like, no, really didn't have a reason. Didn't need his money. He was a nice guy. Just his evil eye was getting on my nerves, so I killed him. Okay. That really freaks me out. So for such a short story, it left a lasting impact. And I think for me, there are some questions about the way in which Poe pulled that story together. Like, why is this so effective? And why doesn't every author use this sort of setup? Like, why is this not the standard for writing a story? So there was just a lot of questions that came up for me about his writing style. And this is super effective and really chilling. How about you, Joey? What was your impression of The Telltale Heart?
I think it's a tongue twister. The Telltale Heart. That's hard to say. But, okay, so I love Edgar Allan Poe. I literally bring him up all the time, especially during our little Summer of Madness thing, because he's so influential, and there are so many things I'm like, oh, Poe did this, and he did it so well. Not that the stories we read weren't great. They were. That's why I read them and discussed them. But you could definitely see where, even if they unconsciously took inspiration from Poe, like I said in the intro there, he left an indelible mark on literature. So there's no getting away from his inspiration. But the writing is really economical. In this gigantic book that I have, it's only 4 pages. So in 4 pages, even though it's a small font and it's pretty tightly packed pages, he manages to create an entire story in such a short amount of time. And so he really has to utilize every single sentence, every phrase, and every single word, punctuation, line break. Like he really had, I could imagine this guy, Edgar Allan Poe, probably drunk, that was just like stressing, maybe not stressing. He seemed like a very anxious guy from his pictures and stuff, really trying to contemplate what is the best word choice here? When should I break the line? And that's a very poetic thing to do. And obviously he's a poet. So that makes sense that he would pay attention to that thing. And I think I said it in about one of our other stories, maybe it was Paranoia or something like that, where I said this is a story that really needs to be read with your eyes on the page, because it's really important when he italicizes something, when he, like I said, when he uses specific punctuation and dash, a semicolon, ellipses, like he's being very specific. So if you're not reading it with your eyes, if you're just listening to it, this is not to be ableist. If you cannot read it with your eyes, please just listen to it then. That's okay. But if you can, if you have the access and the ability to read it with your eyes, then I would highly suggest it, because it is definitely adds to the story. And yeah, I think taking away is something that Edgar Allan Poe does so well, is that he creates these very logical and cogent protagonists who sometimes are unnamed. Like in The Black Cat, I believe the protagonist is unnamed. And we're hook, line, and sinker. I'm like, okay, this guy starts out by telling us he's mad, but I'm like, are you though? Because you're telling me. And that doesn't seem like a very mad thing to do.
I love that. And I would love to, because this is in the public domain, to read the first paragraph aloud to really cement us into how the story just off you go. So the telltale heart begins. True, nervous, very, very dreadfully nervous I had been and am. But why will you say that I am mad? The disease has sharpened my senses, not destroyed, not dulled them. Above all was the sense of hearing acute. I heard all things in the heaven and in the earth. I heard many things in hell. How then am I mad? Hearken and observe how healthily, how calmly I can tell you the whole story. It's impossible to say how first the idea entered my brain, but once conceived, it haunted me day and night. Object there was none. Passion there was none. And it continues, Joey. And what I like about that is that he's like, you say I'm mad. I didn't say I was mad. I am perfectly reasonable, and it wasn't my fault. And the reason it wasn't my fault that I murdered this man is that the idea just seized me, and I just had to see the idea through its logical conclusion. And I really appreciated that you said, if you can get your hands on a physical copy of the manuscript, to read it, because I took a shortcut, which turned out to be a mistake. I picked out several different PDFs from free sources online, and I started reading them. I'm like, this doesn't seem quite right. And because this is such a well-known piece of literature, I think people have taken some liberties with it. Maybe there's translations translated into one language and then retranslated into English. And I was like, I don't think he used those words. And so, Joey, I did end up buying an electronic copy of the book that was sanctioned. It does have the correct language, I believe. And it just made a huge, huge difference. So sometimes we talk in this podcast about maybe we didn't like a story, or maybe we had a different experience because of the translator. Well, he wrote in English for English-speaking readers, right? This is not a translation issue. This is clearly a who took liberties reformatting and retyping his story into the internet. So I'm like, go to the source, do not be fooled, because it will be maddening when you're like, I get what you're saying, but I think Poe said it better, and he certainly did.
Yeah, I want to push back a little bit at what you said before here, a little bit earlier, where you were just saying, because he admits that there's something going on. He says he's afflicted by a disease, but it sharpened his senses. So he is admitting that there is something, he says a disease, I don't know. He probably, there's obviously not a lot of language around mental health at this point in time. And he sure as hell probably wouldn't know that. So he probably thinks this is the disease of the brain, that there is something going on in his mind that is just a sort of like a physical ailment instead of a mental health issue. I can't diagnose this guy, obviously, but obviously he murdered someone. So that's, you're probably not super well balanced. But go ahead.
Can I just stop you there? Because I agree with you that he is being extremely clear that something has gone wrong in his mental health. Although, as you said, in the 1800s, they did not use those words.
Yeah.
But it was interesting for me because he gives us the argument. He's like, well, I know what a madman is. And a madman is a person out of their head and crazy. And clearly, look how articulate I am. I can't be a crazy person. And I was like, okay, this felt like serial killers. I watch a lot of like true crime dramas and those type of things, that it felt exactly like people describe Ted Bundy and other people who just very together, very clear, but there is something deeply, profoundly unright about the way that they view the world and the crimes that they're committed. So I think that was the modern day knowledge that evil exists in the world being represented in this story from so long ago that really creeped me out. I'm like, oh, right, these serial killers and really horrible human beings doing bad things to other people for no apparent reason other than they wanted to. That's not new. And I think that's really, really hard for me to process. Honestly, it's just a lot to process.
Yeah. So it's a tricky opening because we have this guy who's admitting that there is something mentally wrong with him and it's going to cause him to murder someone. But he is saying it sharpens his senses and he still seems very logical. And what I wanted to just discuss is something that everyone uses. And I work in marketing. No one obviously would know that. But so this, and it's going to be tied in, I swear, I didn't just randomly break that out, is that there are these rhetorical devices that we all use and we all consume in media and stuff like that. And I thought like, oh, this is a great opportunity to say like, this is what this is. Okay, so there's ethos, pathos, and logos. So in this instance, he's using logos, which is a rhetorical device that includes any content in an argument that is meant to appeal to logic, according to writingexplained.org, not sponsored. So he's trying to say, like, you know what it sounds like. You probably think you know at least what a madman would sound like. Do I sound mad to you? I do not. I might have some type of illness, but I can guarantee you that it's only made me a better human being and it's made me sharper and better. So, and you're like, well, what you're saying sounds like that adds up. So he's trying to appeal to our logic that like logically a madman would be like a raving lunatic, again, for lack of a better word, and they would not make sense. This would be a nonsensical story. We wouldn't be able to follow his logic at all. There wouldn't be any logic. So he's using this rhetorical device in such an interesting way. And I think it's fun to kind of like poke at a story and be like, what is that? Why is that so effective for us? Because we both said like we believe Poe when he writes these characters because that's what he's doing. He's trying to appeal to us and with these rhetorical devices.
Yeah, so Joey, I want to double down on that because he uses logic so surgically in this story. He says, for 7 nights, I observed this old man in his sleep, waiting for that evil eye to come so I would be provoked to murder him. And he's like, don't worry, after I murdered him, I cut him up, I dismembered him, but I didn't spill a drop of blood on the ground to leave any evidence. I used a basin to catch it. And so again, it is this methodical, you did something very transgressive, something morally wrong by murdering an innocent person for no apparent cause. And he covered up his crime perfectly. And Joey, we talk about this a lot, how it seems like a lot of ideas are recycled over and over again. So when I was reading that, and he's an unnamed narrator, and he kills a guy by stabbing him, he doesn't stab him in one eye, but he kills him because it's this evil eye. I jumped right back to the Odyssey, to Odysseus with Polyphemus, and he kills the Cyclops, the one eye that could see everything. And it was the reason I say that it harkened of that is because, as we know in the Odyssey, Odysseus has a chance to get away scot-free. Like he is on his way out the door. He's like, all right, see you later, sucker. And he's like, tell me your name. He's like, I'm not going to tell you my name. My name is no one. And it's like, okay, that was great. But then he's like, kidding. I'm Odysseus. I'm going to put a little stamp on my handiwork here. And then that everything falls apart. And that is why I feel like there was that compulsion to confess or to brag. And it's like, is it a confession or is it bragging? And that is the thing that came up for me at the end of the story. He obviously was able to get away with his crime. He's a cool customer. He's talking to the police. Nothing to see here. Look around. I got nothing to hide. I did a great job. And then his own guilt, conscience, mental illness, I don't know, his own delusions, he confesses. He's like, I did it. Look under the floorboards. I give up. I'm like, well, that was interesting. Like, what is it within a person that once you've gotten away with a crime, what is the part of you that then has to brag about it or confess or lead to your own downfall? Like, that was super contemporarily interesting to me, Joey.
Yeah, that's funny because I drew a parallel to Odysseus and the Cyclops in our last story, The Frolic by Thomas Ligotti. So you can't escape those Greek myths. They come up a lot too. That's something we talk about all the time. I mean, obviously, because they're so old, they're ancient texts. So obviously that's going to come up. But I wanted to talk, since you're talking about the eye, and that's sort of the motivation for this murder, is because this nameless man is saying, like, I can't with this guy's eye. I cannot. It's not for me. It's not really creeping him out. He doesn't really super explain, like, what is it about the eye? It's just like, it's just an interesting thing. But to your point, there is a literary tradition, and just a tradition in general throughout time, throughout history, where an eye, an all-seeing eye, is sort of comes up. So as you mentioned, the Cyclops in the Odyssey, he says, I think it was his eye. Yes, it was this. One of his eyes resembled that of a vulture, a pale blue with a film over it. And then later in the story, he says, I saw it with perfect distinctness, all a dull blue with a hideous veil over it that chilled the very marrow in my bones. And I do actually want to note that the description is the same for the eye. And so that sort of lends also to his credibility, because he could make up a million things. He could say, whatever now. But he says he uses the same description. So for me, that was like, okay, I still believe you that this is actually happening. But I do want to just mention that it immediately made me think of, not of the Odyssey, but that was a good call there, of the story of Odin from Norse mythology, because he sacrifices one of his eyes in exchange for wisdom from Mimir's well, and it's sort of like representative of this pursuit of knowledge. And that there is this mid-6th century Byzantine painting of Jesus, which I'll put right there. Just imagine it's there. Okay, where he has one like sort of normal eye, you would think, and then he has one eye that has like an enlarged iris, and that's supposed to represent the same thing, that this is an all-seeing divine being. I'm trying to say there is a tradition, so we can see even further back with your Odyssey one. That's further back. So go ahead.
And Joy, I want to go even further back, because Poe
further back than
further
Greek mythology.
Back,
okay,
possibly further back, or at least in the same stream as that. So one of the things that he talks about this eye, he actually uses the word evil eye. And I was curious. I know what giving somebody the evil eye means to me in my contemporary life, but where does that start? And when I looked it up, it goes back pretty much to the dawn of time that has been recorded. The story of either a person who gives you the evil eye is casting a curse on you, or sometimes giving, one of the definitions I read, you give someone the evil eye because you're actually secret jealous. You're jealous of what they possess, and so you're kind of looking at them and they're getting a creepy feeling from you, because they're like, oh, that person has a lot of hostility gained in my direction. So I just thought it was very interesting, because we do reference Poe. He wrote this story 200 years ago or more, referencing ideas that were established prior to his time as well. So Joey, I appreciate you bringing up the painting and the other myths that are surrounded around eyes. Then I also was like, well, then why in Muslim cultures and other cultures, the symbol that they currently use to show somebody to ward off the evil eye is usually a blue eye. And he mentioned it was a blue eye, as you'll note. I also have a pair of blue eyes, my very own, and I use them often to give the evil eye. And what was interesting to me, I was like, well, what percentage of the world's population has blue eyes? Because that seems very interesting. And they said, between 8 and 10%. So 1 out of 10 people that you'll meet will have this blue eye. And it was just so interesting that was a detail that Poe decided to call to our attention, that this was a blue eye sort of filmed over. And I was like, is this an eye that has been blinded? Is this an eye that has a cataract? Like, there's just a lot of things that it brought up. But when he named it the evil eye, I'm like, oh, you are pulling on like very old superstitious and religious imagery and bringing it right to the forefront of this story. And Joy, what I really appreciate about this story is that there is no morality being portrayed. He is not condemned for this. He is not saying, I am sorry that I did it. It seemed very without moral implications that the author was putting on us to decide for ourselves. He's just like, I'm just telling you a story. The end.
Yeah. It's true. I mean, and we don't actually know where he is currently, because this is obviously a recollection and he's telling us the story of what happened, but we don't know like where he ended up. We just know like he confessed and now he's telling us the story. So I wonder where he is. Maybe he's in prison and he's talking about it. I don't know. But Yeah, it's interesting that we both were like, oh, let me trace this back into like what is the tradition of this idea of like an all-seeing eye, that whether it's the evil eye or if it's like Norse mythology or Christianity, where it's this sort of representative, this omnipresent, omnipotent sort of eye. So that's what I was trying to think of this time as I read it. Like, what is it about the eye? He doesn't seem to be grossed out by it. And I'm sure this older man has one blinded eye. That's usually what I've seen that before with a cataract or something like that. But there doesn't seem to be any like physical reaction that he's having to it. It's just that it's bothering him. It's odd that he compares it to a vulture's eye, because a vulture is obviously sort of looking out. They're a carrion bird, so they're looking out for something dead and rotting because they're going to eat it. So is he sort of seeing, is this sort of like, this is an all-seeing eye, but it can tell, that he's going to die or something? Is that what's going on? I think we'd have to just have like a lot of conspiracies in this story because there's not enough information.
But Joey, I love that you even took us down that path, because I think one of the reasons why we like to look at things that occurred previous, like what's the history, what would Poe had been exposed to, what might be in his mind, and what are we contemporarily thinking about. Just when you were talking about Odin and his eye getting plucked out, like I think it got plucked out by a raven or something, didn't it? Like I don't know how Odin did it. But
I don't know how it plucked out. Actually.
So in my mind, I'm like looking at the Viking show or one of the other shows that sort of depict this, and there's always a bird of prey. There is always something there. And I wonder, when you said a vulture is a carrion bird, it is looking for rot. It is looking for things that are dead and decrepit and need to be cleaned up on the earth. And like, the world's garbage, nature's garbage man is these carrion birds. Maybe in the background, the reason he didn't like that vulture looking eye was like, can you see that I'm really evil on the inside? Like, did that character think, this guy's got to go? I don't know why, but this can't be good for me if he lives. It was just a very interesting question of what was his motivation. And obviously listeners are like, how do you know anything that Poe wanted you to read? Like, don't make stuff up. Like he just put this out here. And I was like, yeah, but for me personally, part of the fun of exploring these older texts is to say, what was his references? How does that impact my life now? Can I see other authors using these same types of tropes, devices, symbols that are persistent? Obviously, throughout the thousands of years that we've had culture and we've recorded things, certain things just keep coming up over and over and over. And for me, I think my friends, when they talk about scientific proof, are like, well, there are some fundamental things that no matter how you look at them, they still are true. They still exist. And so for me, this feels like there's some grain of truth. There's something solid in this story that no matter how we dissect it, there's still that essence that remains. And I just think that's super interesting 200 years plus past his writing date.
Yeah, and it's interesting when you're reading contemporary works, if you start to see patterns or little nods to someone like Poe, and it helps you identify and like just deconstruct what that person could potentially be doing. Like we talk about the status quo, well, I sure do, all the time, because I love that. And especially in a short story, because you have like this much space basically to create that for the reader.
Thank you so much for using the word, economical and smart use of language, because you have such a short period of time. So I wanted to look up what the actual definition of status quo is. I know we talk about it a lot, and I think most people have a general sense of what it is, but it's often useful for us to just have a shared definition. So status quo is a Latin phrase meaning the existing state of affairs. So when we say, what's the status quo? It's like, how are things happening today? In literature, setting the status quo means establishing the normal or ordinary state of affairs for characters and their world before a significant disruption or conflict occurs. This involves introducing the characters, their relationships, their environment, the typical challenges they face, often highlighting what is usual for them before something unexpected changes their lives. And there are many ways to do that, but part of it is you set the scene, you define what their normal day is like, you find out what the stakes are in their life, like what is important to them, what's motivating them, and how does that fit into society's norms. So I appreciated having that fundamental, I've looked it up, telling you these are the elements of a status quo that we instinctively know, but it's also something to keep an eye on. So when he is addressing us directly as the reader in the first person's like, I know you think I'm crazy, but here are all the reasons that I'm not. He is setting the scene. He is setting us up to have this direct relationship with the character and be invested in figuring out what exactly is going to happen. So I really love Joey, and I know you've said this in episodes before, Poe is a master of setting the status quo. Instantly you're in the story, you're like, yep, I know what this world is like. It is world building, and then it is world destroying because he puts something into the story that you're like, say what? Like what? That's not where I thought the story was going to go.
Yeah. I mean, all authors have to disrupt their own status quo, but if you do it effectively, you'll get the reaction from your reader that you really want, which is like, oh my gosh, that's not good. Like, this is not how it's supposed to go. But I think, and there's so many like literary devices that we could really talk about. Like, we talked about the rhetorical devices. You just talked about a literary device. Or that's not a literary device. You just talked about the structure of the story. But I think a literary device, which he does use in this story, is repetition. That's like, there's like a million examples of that. When in the very beginning he says, true, nervous, very, very dreadfully nervous, I had been and am, but why will you say I am mad? So, and that's also, this one's kind of poetic too, as if you just read that by itself. And so throughout the story, he says like he slowly put his head into the door, and he does these little bits of repetition throughout, which really just does not add to his credibility. Now it does the opposite, because we can see how hyper fixated he is. Well, to me, okay, he seems like super hyper fixated, which does not to me mean, or does not equate to logic to me. So it's just like this weird juxtaposition where you're, as a reader, I am reading the story and vacillating between like, do I trust this narrator or do I think he is actually mad? And it's hard to tell, like, is this, I don't know. I mean, obviously he's mentally unwell because he murdered this old man that he apparently really liked. He's like, this guy never insulted me. I have no beef with this guy. He's perfectly nice, but he had to go.
That evil eye, can't have it.
Get an eye patch.
Just or perhaps look away, Joey.
Yeah,
there are always options.
There's nothing wrong with it.
Yeah. So I completely agree with you about the repetition being very chilling, and also a reminder of something is not quite right with this person. He feels like a classic serial killer when you hear about their bios or what they do. They're very meticulous. They are very observing, and they get fixated on these small details. And it does just, at least for me, it creeped me out in the story to be like, slow to your room. And I shielded the candle until I had one ray of light that went directly on your face. And it was creepy, Joey. And he said when the old man woke up, he could feel that the old man was in terror. And he's like, I'm just going to sit here for an hour watching this guy scared to death that something's going to happen. And I did it. And I lived to tell the tale. And that guy didn't. And I was like, I do not like the idea of someone observing me in my sleep 7 nights in a row, waiting to kill me. Like, that was pretty creepy. And
lock
all days
door.
He's like, yeah. And he's like, oh, it was the wind in the chimney. Oh, it was a mouse scurrying across the floor. And it's like, okay, yes, all of those things could have happened, but it was you just waiting for my eye to open so you could murder me in my sleep. Not loving it. So Poe, thank you. Like, I just said that, Joey, and I have goosebumps now. Okay, well, my door is locked. Effective. My alarm is on. Everything is all good. It's not a mouse. It's a murderer. I told you.
Yeah. I can't watch a lot of those documentaries because then I'll start looking up, like, how do I make my house where you can't break in? How do I make that foolproof? And then you're like, some of these things I don't really need. But anyway, when you're talking about because we were obviously just talking about the repetition and how the story, he really forces the reader to slow down your reading.
And Joy, I wanted to just call attention to something you brought our attention to earlier, is the way in which he wrote it. He puts in these M dashes, he puts in these breaks, he starts new paragraphs. Like, he is controlling the pacing in which we are getting the story unfurled to us. And I think that's really important. So we are just getting set up into the story, and he's explaining to us that he has no beef with this gentleman. And every night, about midnight, I turned the latch of his door and opened it so gently. And then, when I had made an opening sufficient for my head, I put in a dark lantern, all closed, that no light shone out, and then I thrust in my head. You would have laughed to see how cunningly I thrust it in. I moved it slowly, very, very slowly, so that I might not disturb the old man's sleep. It took me an hour to place my whole head within the opening so far that I could see him as he lay upon his bed. So, Joey, that freaks me out. The slow, meticulous, I got all night. It's going to take me an hour to just get my head into position so I can see this man. It's okay. I'll wait. I'm like, no, this is creepy. Normal people don't do that. Stop it.
Yeah. So, but my point was that why I wanted that section was because Poe forces us to, first of all, we can, as you're reading it, that's how I wasn't reading it with your voice in my head, but the same sort of affectation to where you're sort of like whispering it while you're reading it, because you know the tension has already been built enough at this point, which is extremely sudden or extremely quickly in this story because it's only 4 pages depending on your translation. So again, he has to be so mindful about how he wrote this entire thing, because you have to have enough tension at this point so that you do get that effect when you're reading it where you're like kind of whispering and you're like, oh, I don't want to like make too much noise as I'm reading it, because you're in the story with this guy and he's unnamed. He's the everyman sort of character. So it could be you.
Yeah, it could be Joey. You'll just never know. But what I do appreciate about this story is that he is letting us know that this is a transgression. This is going against social norms. I think in my life, people that I spend time with would find it highly unusual, creepy, and possibly menacing if you were to break into their room or creep into their room, even if you were sharing a house with them, and just stare and watch them sleep. I think that's not a thing that generally society then or now would appreciate. And we often talk about the timeless essence of stories. And obviously this was written in 1809, no electricity, no flashlights, no anything. So he is using a lantern, a match. He's covering his tracks with, his hand and to block out the light. And I just thought that was so incredibly effective, because we hear like the legend of Sleepy Hollow and all of these creepy stories from the past where the effective use of when it is dark, it is dark. They had no light pollution. They had nothing. Like pitch black, moonless night, you are SOL. There is no saving you because there is no light source other than your lantern, which probably blew out because a gust of wind from the netherworld came and the spirits are after you, right? So all of that creepiness is just built into like, it's dark, but I can see. Really?
Yeah, and it's just like it's such a visceral story, because you could imagine what it would be like to wake up as this old man, possibly be blind in one eye, so already being impaired somewhat, and then struggling to see it, if you could see anything in the darkness from your bed, and how like entirely creepy that is. And he doesn't mention the lack of light pollution at this point, but he does mention, obviously he would be like, oh, there's going to be light pollution one day, I should probably put that in here. But he does say that the shutters were shut really tight because they were afraid of robbers getting in. So like there's definitely no light coming in, even if there is an outside door, like moonlight or something.
And I love it, Joy, because again, it is sort of also a Stephen King type device of the horror is inside your house right now. Don't you worry about the outside guys breaking in. You should worry about who already has access to your home. And I think that was just another layer of creepiness to that bit of the story. And so interesting, if we think that the old man had a blind eye, if that's why that was discolored, that what I have heard about blindness, and I think this was true with my father's descent into being a blind person, that his other senses were heightened. And that is part of this story, that when the madman, the protagonist of the story, says, I'm not debilitated by whatever is afflicting me, it's making me better. I have an acute sense of hearing. Mm-hmm. And so I'm now seeing that sort of reflected in the murder victim. He wakes up, he's like, I'm pretty sure I heard something. I was like, no, just, I'm probably imagining it. I'll just sit here. and wait for my killer. And then the killer kills him. And it's like, well, what was going, and Poe does not take us here, but I'm going to take us here. What was that old man thinking in that moment of his death? Like, see, I told you somebody was coming for me. Or was he completely taken unawares? Like, it's just an interesting, like, in the moment of your death, what are you thinking about? And I just thought that was such a weird, open question when he was using my sense of hearing is heightened, and so might my victims, because he is hearing various things in the night and trying to justify them with logic when no logic is going to predict, actually, it's a madman right behind you. That's really what's happening. It's not a mouse. It's not the wind blowing through an open chimney. It's really your death sitting at the foot of your bed.
And the protagonist also mentioned, because you were saying that he says he has a heightened sense of hearing, that he says that he's afraid that the old man's heartbeat is going to wake the neighbors. And so that's sort of the reason why he finally decides to go for it and complete the murder, as he has been planning, because he's afraid of getting caught. Even though he screams, then the old man screams, and that's what makes the police come, not the heartbeat.
And I love that he has a cover for it. He's like, oh, yes, dreams are dreams. Sometimes you scream out in your sleep. Nothing to see here. It's fine. And I think, Joy, I know I'm going to harken back to all of these modern horrific stories that I read, but there's a lot of being a cunning liar and getting away with murder, because you're just like, oh no, there's a perfectly reasonable explanation. There are obviously no people here. It is just me. Who else would have called out? It's not like I murdered someone. Like, come on, get real, people. That didn't happen. It's like, actually, that first thing was a little bit closer to the truth. And again, that to me was like the Odysseus not being able to just get away scot-free. He has to boast. He has to be like, I'm so clever. You'll never figure it out. It's like, oh, well, let me just tell you. And I was like, yeah, it's the being so clever that usually ends up getting people in the end. So reader tip, don't be clever. Just tell the truth and you can probably stay out of trouble.
Yeah, also just like don't murder people.
Just don't murder people.
That's your best bet. Just don't do that.
Doesn't matter how many books you read. This felt like a Dexter episode. They're like, oh, if you want to dismember somebody in your basement, you should probably put down some protective covering and have a basin there to catch all the blood. And I was just like, Poe, that was creepy, man. Like, you should not be making a how-to video on how to do this right now. It just was really weird.
Yeah, I guess it was a how-to. We also have to sort of maybe take this story with a grain of salt, because why is he able to now tell us this story? Did he write it down? Is he telling this to someone else? What's the scenario here? Maybe we weren't supposed to think that far past it, but I certainly do. Like, where are you, bro? Where are you now?
And Joey,
why are you telling me?
Yeah, and Joey, that takes us right back to the story we read, 3 Drops of Blood, because we also were like, are you in a hospital? Are you in your apartment? Are you in jail? Like, nobody seems to know exactly where this particular narrator is telling his story from. So I think that was a very interesting question that you raised. It's like, okay, you're telling me a recollection. Great. Maybe he's in the madhouse. Maybe he's in jail. Like, maybe he's on the lam running from the cops. Like, I don't know where he is, but it is a very interesting question. So, Joey, I would love to just say thank you so much for participating in our Summer of Madness. This has been really, really a fun romp, and also a little creepy and a little terrifying, but also overall, it was just a lot of fun to delve into ways writers across time have thought about mental health, mental illness, plot construction, conversation, setting the status quo, giving us all these beautiful examples of language. I just really think that it was amazing for us to have the Summer of Madness 2025, and we'll see if that's an annual tradition, but there's a lot of crazy stuff out there to talk about, and it was super fun. So Joey, do you want to tell us what might be coming down the pike for us?
I will say that we'll be entering our next era, which will be the Stream of Consciousness September. That's the commonality between all the stories that we're going to be reading in September, is that they're all Stream of Consciousness, and they're going to go from like, okay, yeah, that was Stream of Consciousness, to be like, what? So it's going to go by difficulty.
I love it. So we will each week level up to the next degree of difficulty in reading these Stream of Consciousness stories.
Yeah. If someone listens and reads along, and you're wondering, like, I've never really read Stream of Consciousness, or maybe it's intimidating, or you've tried it, you like immediately went to like Ulysses. I don't know why you would do that, but we're not reading Ulysses. Oh my god. We would be here for a while. Then I think you'll build your stream of consciousness skills along the way. So you should do that, y'all.
Yeah, Joey, I love it. So we will see you next week for our first story. See you then.